for letting me have the privilege to serve as your facilitator for this conversation. As you probably have figured out by now, research is the thing that I do with my time, and so I'm really excited to have this conversation. Brad and I touched base on Friday just to sort of talk about the goals for this meeting, and I believe that those were informed by a conversation with you, Denver, sort of like what we want to achieve. So I thought that I would just quickly say sort of what our goals for this meeting are, this conversation, and then I've got a few guiding questions to lead us and just have some conversation. So I think the major purpose of this meeting is to sort of understand where we are in terms of research, understand what we know, and also understand what we'd like to know, right? Get some ideas of what questions we have that are unanswered, and then figuring out how we can go about answering those questions as this committee moves forward. So I have 3 questions that I'm going to ask us, but first I think on my notes, I had Nathan as the note taker, but we did not have a reporter fulfilled for the next EAC meeting. So I wanted to ask, for the good of the order, if somebody would volunteer to report what we discussed today to the EAC.
Hi, this is Shibu. I'm happy to do that.
Great, thanks, Shibu. I appreciate it. All right, so did everybody get a chance to take a look at the 2020 report that Bradley sent out and that we talked about a couple meetings ago? I think time doesn't make any sense to me anymore, so it could have been last EAC, I'm not sure. And then the 2015 data, did folks get a chance to look at that, or would it be helpful to discuss sort of the key pieces?
You know, I've walked through the 2020 survey several times, but it has been a while since I looked at 2015. So I think that'd be a great place to start.
Great. Now I need to get it pulled up on my screen. Here we go. Okay, so 2015. A couple pieces that I want to point out for us when we think about 2015. The 2020 survey certainly was informed by the 2015 work. So we built on what we know, what we knew, and what we understood from that. But then one important thing I want us to keep in mind is that 2016, what we essentially did with the survey was out in the field, Bradley, correct me if I'm wrong, was in January. And so the timing wasn't like it was following the 2016 November election, right? So it was essentially not apples to apples with the 2020 survey, right? Which went out after the November election.
Yeah, we had just gotten this when I came in, which was January 2016. So we were getting back these responses, but it was December, right before the holidays.
Right. Thanks, Brad.
Sorry.
No, I wrote the survey and I can't remember when it was. So like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Okay. So essentially we have some of those similar questions, right? Like, why did you vote? What was the reason why you did vote, or will you vote in the next election? And similar to last time, to 2020, we heard civic duty. A question that we asked in 2015 that we didn't ask in 2020 was why you will not vote. And we found that it wasn't worth using time. So the way that we think about running telephone polls is in time, because it costs money for time. So we figured that if we were using the registered voter list, that asking why they weren't voting, the people said that wasn't really that impactful for our data. This is a very small number, 16 respondents out of 605. So from there, we moved into questions about confidence, and these were broadly repeated in the 2020 survey, right? So confident that my absentee voted is counted. I believe ballots are untampered with and secure, that my confidential information is kept secure. A lot of the questions that, surprise, surprise, come 2020 were top of mind for a lot of people, right, when we were doing a mail ballot around the country. And these questions, this is a bit into the weeds, but for folks on this call, you might care. I subsequently built a confidence index off of these around voting that we can compare this year to 2015, and we could compare then to 2022 or 2024 as a way of monitoring. that's like a statistical piece that I've done some research around that was interesting. And so these questions are all part of that matrix that are understood through that. Any questions up to this point? Okay.
Smoothest meeting ever.
I know. I feel like I'm talking to my budget class. It's quiet. Then we asked a series of questions that have been historically used in voter behavior research. So things about how much you agree with trusting different levels of government. So I trust my local representatives, I trust state representatives, I trust federal representatives, I trust, tribal governments. So those were all around trust and confidence in sort of both elections and in the system. One of the pieces in the election literature talks about our trust for local people, right? So like we trust Bradley. This is the same that you see with local elected officials, right? Versus saying, I don't like Congress, right? We might like our elected official, we might not like Congress. So we were curious about seeing those pieces. I can't quite see what you're highlighting, Brad.
Well, the federal representatives strongly agree. This is mostly for the video later. It helps us with note taking. I'm like,
so then one of the main components of the 2015 survey was focused on understanding how to serve the voting population, right? We were thinking vote center models, moving to a centralized polling place versus local polling places versus absentee. So we moved into a section on Missoula County election practices to understand what voters were willing to do and what voters wanted. So some of the takeaways from here was people would be willing to travel 4 to 10 miles to go to a polling place. They think that the responsible use of tax dollars is the most important thing for an election. They think that utilization of technology is the least important, which was an unexpected outcome back in 2015. We asked about the questions we did in 2020 about what people would like to see from Missoula County, right, in terms of voter education. So they said an online voter registration and change of address, technology to allow voting at any polling place, increased accessibility for people with disabilities, and so forth. And then the third section of the survey focused on efficiency and ease of the voting process. And so we asked about why people might not vote, but again, we have very high voter turnouts. So this is kind of a question that we didn't think was important to repeat, not enough information on candidate or issues, but that does inform the 2020 finding that people want a Missoula County voter guide. We asked about if people would be more likely to vote if elections were at the same time every year, if elections for local, state, and federal office happened at the same day, if elections were public holidays. So just trying to get an understanding of like what barriers might exist for people. What kind of polling places people like, registration, change of address. So then we got into process questions again, asking about various elements of the electoral process having to do with voter registration and changing my address, registering online, and so forth. So that was sort of where we were in 2015. Does that give you a quick 30,000 foot overview?
It certainly helps me. I can't speak for anyone else. I did have just a general question about the questions in the survey about confidence and trust in elections. Was there much of a difference between 2015 and 2020?
Great question. No. I think if anything, do we see higher confidence, Brad, in 2020 than 2015?
I think it went up slightly, yeah. We did break out those into strongly agree, neutral, strongly disagree, and strongly or disagree. So there's a little bit more variation to where these tend to be lumped together. Strongly agree and agree is one category. So you get to see that breakdown a little bit more, but we actually went up, which is great.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think the first question that's important for us to think about, to ask as we take on our task as the research committee is, knowing what we know now, right? We've talked about confidence. We've talked about, why people vote. We've talked about what people want. What are the questions that we wish that we knew? What do we wish that we knew, right? Are there pieces of the puzzle that are left unanswered? Are there pieces that we don't have information to inform our decision making that would be helpful? I'm curious to hear from the folks on this call, what do we wish we knew? Because that can help inform our future research agenda.
This is Todd, and I think it would be very interesting to, well, I presume we'd revisit the confidence, but it might be interesting to break that out a little bit and ask about, fraud or security or some of those kind of questions.
Great.
And conversely, I would want to ask a voter who had concerns about election security integrity, what do you want to see? What would be persuasive to you as far as information? What can we give you that gives you more confidence that elections are being run securely and accurately,
And yeah, I think I'm right there. How do I improve your confidence? Do you feel confidence that our elections are run well? What would improve your confidence? And I mean, you guys have heard this in every call. Denver, I think you've been on every single one, and you've heard me say, I want that 9% to feel more confident in the elections. And I know that it is when we have 91% that feel confident in our elections, that's amazing. I want everybody to know and understand what everybody here knows and understands is why these elections can be so trustworthy and above board, and what would help you feel better about that. Now, this is where I echo out to you guys. When do we get a diminishing return on investment? To ask that 9% what would make them feel more confident, is that going to be a useful section of time for a phone survey? Asking those voters about that, will that get us data that we want that is helpful, or will we now be looking at 6 respondents and their response of what they think will make our elections safer? And can we really use that to extrapolate out good data?
And it's a really good point.
Yeah. When was the 2020 survey done, Christine?
I think that we put it in the field November. The election was on November 3rd, is that right? Or 2nd? And we went into the field on November 9th?
Yeah, we went out right after certification. So I think it was the 13th, I think, is when we started going through, because we wanted to make sure that the election was certified.
Right.
So that people could actually say, yes, I'm confident.
Right.
Well, those figures may have changed had you done the survey in late December, just because of all the frothing at the mouth by certain elected officials. So I think it would still be a useful expenditure of time, at least if you get a response that says they had lower confidence than you'd like.
This brings to me a really interesting and important point to focus on. One is, what the value of a post-election survey is, right, to assess what just happened. But 2, I hear us talking about another issue, which is related, but also could be addressed through a separate data collection technique, right? Calling from a polling place, asking people that maybe didn't vote or aren't confident in the election process, why they aren't confident, are probably low response participants, right? They're probably not going to feel there are issues of social desirability in telephone polling and how people want to respond to a live person on the phone. But it makes me think that there's an opportunity to think about collecting data about the change in confidence or about what would make people feel more confident, maybe in another forum that doesn't have to be associated with the post-election survey. But just food for thought and thinking about who we're talking to, right? Who our audiences are, and how we can reach out to them in an effective way.
Yeah, because maybe what we could do is do an individual survey of people who didn't vote, because we have a record of those who didn't vote. We don't necessarily need to do this same aspect, but the EAC has set up surveys and methods for collecting data before. We could work and establish them again. And this is an expensive process. To run this survey is about $20,000, and we're investing heavily to make sure that we can get good information, good data, and be responsive. We want people to feel confident, and we want to do what we can do to help them feel confident. But there's a lot of ways that we can get more information. One survey a year does not need to be the only thing we do. So did I hit what you said?
Yeah.
Kind of echo that correctly, Christina?
Yep.
Great. Because I know Denver and I, we've had that discussion a lot. We want to know what drives people who aren't voting that could make them vote. And that might be a good opportunity. The other aspect, that something that I had thought about, just to put the bug in your ear and take over the conversation for a second, is what if we looked at what year it was and how we surveyed? Because we can ask voters each election, but then in this off year that's not a federal presidential, where the number of voters is lower, do we want to do the same survey questions this year? Do we want to look at a different set or a different area like Christina's bringing up, that we could maybe have a different pool that we're calling for and asking different questions? Personally, I really want this to build a long-term dashboard of information that voters can use to see how things are changing and have different circumstances. All mail, federal, COVID-19, municipal. After that, after a recent, after like not a federal year. So there's different aspects to look at. Okay, I'll shut up because we all know I can talk throughout all of these meetings.
No, I think it's really helpful to talk about, Brad, and for the folks on the call, Bradley and I talked on Friday about this need for baseline data, right? So the idea that 2015 wasn't exactly like the baseline, and neither was a COVID election, right? This 2020 probably isn't a baseline either. That doesn't mean that the data aren't valuable and that there isn't good conclusion that we can draw from this, but just to think about, what we're doing. And just one final aside is that I know Bradley's been in conversation with Sam Scott, who's a worker at the county, who was actually part of the 2015 survey research team, who's going to help build out the data interactiveness for this survey research, which is really, really cool. And I don't know anywhere else that's doing stuff like this. So we might be the first in the nation to have like confidence voters information in the data visualization process for voters to access.
There are two big questions that I have in my mind when it comes to elections. The one that is kind of first and foremost in front of my mind is why voters drop off, why we see a decrease in voting activity in off-year elections, in city council, municipal elections that are non-federal. Why do voters vote for their congressman but not their city council person? That's one line of questioning I think would be really interesting and really informative to explore. Is it simply a lack of information? Is it a lack of actual engagement in candidates and volunteers talking to the voter? What is it that keeps so many people from the polls when it comes to off-year elections? The other big one in my mind, and I'm going to hold off on that for now. That's the most clear, big picture question in my mind, is why people don't vote in off-year elections.
Great. I think that helps us think about what Bradley brought up, the ability to maybe do think about how we use an off year to ask some questions that maybe we don't ask on federal years. And Brad, I don't know, what is the turnout usually for city council? Is it 30%?
There we go. It varies. It's 30 to, depending on if there's a ballot issue. I mean, anything that hits a taxpayer in the wallet will drive turnout up. And then also for a mayoral year, that's really going to change our turnout. And so I would say 30 to 40% this year, just judging by the number of people who have asked about candidate filing upcoming. We'll have a very busy municipal year because we're looking at judge, possibly a new judge, all 6 city councils, and the mayor.
Right. Great. When I joined the EAC, I know that one of the questions that we had as a group was why people aren't voting. And I guess I want to throw that into the hopper here for conversation, because that's a separate population, right? But that is a question that we can investigate, right? If we think that's a valuable piece for the EAC to focus on, I want to revisit that, and I'm curious what people's thoughts are.
I think that's a fascinating question.
Agreed.
To jump in just a little bit, one of the things that I think about is, can we do a survey that asks why people are voting and why people aren't voting, and will we get those responses in the capacity we're looking for? Because, you know, if we survey voters in a municipal election, if we did a survey of registered voters, I think it would be a lot different than 91% ballot return rate. I think that maybe we could build that in for the off-year election to ask and say, you know, possibly, did you vote in this election? Yes or no? Why not? Because odds are 60% of people are going to say, no, I didn't vote. This is where I get a little fuzzy. I'm like, those who answer phone surveys may be more likely to vote. I don't want to draw any questions out of there that is out of my wheelhouse, but I'm like, I do feel like just statistically, this would be the time to ask it. Is in this, did you vote, and why or why not? And then we're not looking at that 9 respondents that said they didn't vote and here's why. Instead, we have 400 respondents and they say, well, here are the reasons why I didn't vote, which gives us a lot better data.
Great.
I'm really trying to figure all of this out, Christina. I hope it's showing. But like, this was kind of my response for wanting some of these breakdowns even more so, and being like, well, I want to know by party and by this. And you're like, no, that's not what we do in these surveys. It'll get you too narrow of a data set.
Brad, I think that point about the ability to pull a list that shows who voted in 2020, and then if they didn't vote in the municipal election, I think that's a valuable list. That's the question, right? It's not just people that are not voting, it's people that would be likely voters that didn't vote. I'll just add in here, we can always think about additional research methods for hard to reach populations, right? So non-voters are generally a hard to reach population, but there are things like focus groups or other research tools that we could use to do outreach. It wouldn't be like, you wouldn't be reporting about something at the 99% confidence interval, but focus group research and hard to reach population research is just as valuable.
This is where we need Josh.
Yeah, I was.
Sorry, go ahead, Todd.
I was just. I was going to ask about if you'd given any thought or to focus groups, trying to dig down a little deeper than you would get on a phone survey with follow-up questions and discussion.
And I was joking a little bit because I said, sorry, Todd, I keep jumping on you there.
No, that's fine.
I was just joking a little bit because this is where Josh comes in and he's like, yes, I'm on the budget team. Let's do that. And so, you know, that to me, I mean, we are making a very specific budget request and an investment to do this process. That to me is where I start to get a little bit realistic and say, so Christina, what does that cost?
Right.
you know, I don't want that to be a limiting factor, but I do want to keep that in mind that, you know, this is an investment from the county, and trying to extrapolate out what data we can get, how it will be useful, and just justifying that cost. We do really good if we can justify it. Okay, I'm tired of naysaying here. I'll mute again.
Fred, I just have a quick question that I want to throw in there with that, because yeah, budget is a real thing, right? And you have the responsibility of, you know, being judicious with the use of taxpayer dollars. So don't think that I'm unaware. One of the strategies, if this is a path that we go down, there are ways to think about collecting some of that information, right? So if there are other touch points that we can utilize. So maybe telephone polls are different than mail polls, which are expensive, but maybe there's a place where somebody interacts with the government or with a partner that we could use to receive data, right, from them. So I'm thinking about how you talked about disseminating information using the credit unions or a bank during the election. So maybe there's a partner that we could do, you know, the water company or somebody that would be an easy touch point to connect that way. So just we have strategies that we could use if we needed to.
Writing some down right now. Yep, I think that's great.
And we had a little bit of a conversation about that during the outreach committee. And one of the things that I've thought about many times before is when it comes to citizens interacting with that point of contact with their local government, is that an opportunity to talk to someone about registering a vote or why they should vote, you know? But it also brought up an interesting question in my mind that, you know, from the results that we've got from the recent election and from 2015, citizens seem to be really pleased with the services they're being provided. I mean, but one of the questions that I would love to ask voters, and maybe this is a mistake, but do you feel like the services that you're getting on and before election day are worth the taxes that you're paying? I would be hesitant to go down that road because most people don't have a complex understanding of what the county budget looks like and how much of their money that they're paying, A, is even going to county government, and B, is going to specific services. So I feel like that is a can of worms that we want to think really carefully before we ask something like that. But it is in the back of my mind that if voters consistently are telling us that they are pleased with their vote by mail experience and they're pleased with the amount of time that they have to wait in line to vote and the amount of information that they're providing, that they're getting on election day, is that worth the taxes that you're paying? You know?
Great.
We do a cost per ballot issued and a cost per voted ballot.
Do you know what they are off the top of your head, Bradley? That was my next question for you.
Nathan probably knows it better than me. So I'm like, let me be very honest. I can pull it up too.
I'll pull it up right now.
Yeah, perfect. I know that for the Sealy election, it was $9.50 per voted ballot. It depends on the election, and those numbers break my heart sometimes. But I'm like, you know, running an election is a process that we want to make sure is open and accessible to everybody. And we want to do this to be as good of stewards of taxpayer dollars as we can. But also, when we hit a 2020 COVID-19 all-mail election, we have a lot of outreach to do. We have a lot of people to man drop locations to pick up ballots, and those costs get high. And that's not necessarily a sign of bad stewardship of taxpayer dollars. That might just be that we did amazing outreach in this last election. Nathan, did you get them?
Almost there.
No worries.
Well, as Nathan,
Can you all still, oh, sorry.
Oh, what was that, Nathan?
Can you all still hear me okay? I've got cost per issued ballot, $3.26. Cost per voted ballot, $3.88.
Oh, that's right, because we had so many dang voters in this last election.
So many voters. Yep, drove that right down.
So per voted ballot was 328?
388.
88. Thank you. Interesting. Okay. I bet that the vast majority of voters have absolutely no idea how much it costs.
Nathan, did that include all the CTCL funding too?
So it does not. Some of that CTL funding is on the side.
Okay.
But it's an important question that I think we need to at least be thinking about, even if we don't want to formulate it and ask it right now. Because at the end of the day, these services that are so critical to our democracy those decisions are made by individuals that are elected and are accountable to the voters. And if voters are not connecting in their mind the tremendous great services they're getting on election day from Missoula County elections to the bills that they're paying, there's a fundamental disconnect, and that's going to become a problem at some point, right? And it should be in our minds of, if we're asking the county to continue to make these kind of investments in our elections, we need to have a way to say, this is what voters want. This is what voters expect.
And I love that, because I was like, what about that as a question?
Right.
You know, like, do you feel like following up and doing surveys with voters like this is an important part of this process? Now, I mean, Christina, I wonder if we're just preaching to the choir there, because these are the people who answer a phone survey. It's not the people who are like, wait, what? Click. But I'm like, you know, would that have value? And specifically looking at the people who answer it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's some creative ways about asking this question. This what Denver's circling around is something that's deeply interesting to me, based in my own academic research on, innovation and the constrained budget reality of elections across the country. I think there's some creative ways that we could ask about sort of what would you like to see, the magic wand question, like what would you see if you could do anything, and how much would you be willing to pay for it? That kind of question. And there's also an opportunity to provide this information, thinking about the outreach committee that Denver just mentioned. $3.26 for a ballot is like, less than a cup of coffee, right? If you're going to one of those fancy coffee places.
Although it should be noted, if the CTCL grant funding was included in there, the price would nearly double.
Okay.
But, that was
one time,
just a one-time thing and not really part of my calculations.
Oh, what was that figure, Nathan? I'm not familiar with. You said a CCL grant?
Well, so there was a grant that we received through Facebook that helped to fund a lot of our election processes this year. It helped pay for, we had discretion as to how we used it, and we invested it in additional security. We funded some of our labor, and we used it to pay for things that would be cost prohibitive, like TV and ad campaigns that just are out of our budget in any normal year. That's just an overview, quick overview for you.
Yep.
I see. So these are things you wouldn't have spent money on without the grant.
Yeah.
Many of them, yes.
Okay.
And some of them,
Thanks.
areas where we would have had to fund it through the county because of all of the changes. I think of the TV ads as the best example. We would never have been able to put out a TV ad, but we would have had to put out extra ads, and that would have been a budgetary cost. And what a great cross section of the population you get by plugging something in at the 5 o'clock news.
Yeah.
It was very valuable and completely would have been cost prohibitive without those extra funds.
I see. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I've asked, what would we want to know, right, about what do we wish we knew about our voters in Missoula County or non-voters? And so we've talked a little bit about the ideas around confidence and maybe thinking about how 2020 has affected that, right, in terms of fraud. We've talked a little bit about, wanting to hear from voters about why they don't vote, right? Likely voters that vote in federal elections and then don't in city elections, why that is. we've talked a little bit about, what voters want. I think we've talked a little bit about that, like what do they think is important, sort of related to this idea of value, right? What do we think and what do we want? Sort of from that down and dirty summary, are there other pieces that you think are missing from this conversation?
I personally, this is Todd, think that pretty well covers it. Like Bradley said, we do have to be mindful of the expense, but those are the important questions that I can think of.
I agree. I think we've gotten to the root of what it is that we really want to learn. Why people don't vote? Who are they? What are the barriers? How can we help them have more confidence in the election process? That's it in a nutshell for me.
And I was just going to echo that. That confidence piece to me is so dang critical. And it doesn't have to necessarily be our baseline, but we've started to build that in. And it has that. I think that is very helpful because the metric for our office is really clearly, if nobody has confidence in the process, we're doing something wrong. When 91% of people have confidence in the process, we're doing a pretty darn good job. And I'll always want that to be 100, and that's okay. But I think making sure that stays in with these other pieces.
And this is a little off the topic, Bradley, but it does relate to confidence. I think your response in the Missoulian to those questions was wonderful.
Thank you. We're always going to work to educate everybody about our processes and policies.
Yeah.
Well, great. This is really helpful. And I think understanding, for me as a researcher, understanding a little bit more about the data that are available from you, Bradley, I think that there is a unique opportunity here to, as a team, to think about 2021 as a year to look at the voters that dropped off, right? And find some of the answers to those questions. So my wheels are spinning. I think this is exciting. One question I have before we sort of wrap things up, if we think about building our data, right? One of the goals here that Bradley has mentioned is being able to communicate with the public about what we hear and be transparent, right? So one of the big things that we see with this 2020 fiasco, right, is this idea that like ballots go into a room and then we don't know what happens, which we know is not true, right? So we want to make sure that we're communicating about confidence and sharing that information. And as we build a time series, right, so that's the idea that we ask the same questions or similar questions time after time, right? The census is a perfect example. Are there questions that we have asked that you want to make sure we continue to ask? So I heard us mention some of those confidence questions, but are there others that we want to make sure we keep building over time asking?
I would just say the questions about the services we provide is a valuable one to me. What people are looking for, are we delivering the services that they need as voters in their various districts throughout and remote reaches of the county especially.
I have said this before, but at the risk of being repetitive, I think continuing to hammer home about what are the barriers to you voting, and not just in federal election, but in off-year elections as well, and school board as well. We should not just be concerned about elections once every 2 years. It should be something that we're all actively engaged in. And I think just continuing to ask repeatedly, what are the barriers? Is it time? Is it money? Is it just trust in the system?
Great.
Mm-hmm. So that brings up an awesome idea, and I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole with 15 minutes in this. One of my ideas about this linear time-based display is a little bit about what's going on at that point in time. This was an all-male municipal election. This was a contested federal election with COVID-19, all run by mail. we could look at the potential in the future, likely on an off year. I'm realizing those don't exist. And we could also ask specifically around the school. Because our school special district is every May. And guess what? That's a whole different set of voters, a whole different area than it is for the municipal. And it might be interesting to not just go federal cycle and municipal all lumped together, but to ask about schools and get that information as well. Because I feel like that's one of the areas where where information can be the hardest to get from our office, from candidates, from a lot of things. Some of this is timelines, some of this is knowledge of the process, and some of this is just engagement.
Mm-hmm.
When you said, what do you want, Nathan? Were you kind of referring to the ballot drop boxes, county produced voter guide?
Yeah, just all of the various services that we offer to help bring the vote to people. You know, I mean, especially with things like the proposal that you've got coming forward with new precinct level tabulators. Is that a service that people want? I mean, I think we are hearing that it is. Those kind of things, how we present the opportunity to vote to the electorate. That's the stuff I'm interested in hearing.
Yeah, because I want to hear what they want. I love that. The county produced voter guide is a blessing and a curse. We're doing so good, they want data from us, and if we provide it, then all of a sudden we may not be that trusted source. So I love hearing that, and I like hearing about those future opportunities. We are changing. We will hit a point where we don't have access to all of the schools that we've had access to in the past. Those questions that Rebecca asked in 2015 were not asked randomly. How far would you be willing to travel to go to a polling place? How do you feel about a vote center? How do you feel about a centralized polling location? And I think just informing a little bit about future opportunities, what those can look like, because I want to vote at a vote center is great if you know what that is. If you don't know what that is, it can be hard to know. And figuring out both what currently we could provide and what we could do in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I mean, something like some of the work of the EAC, I mean, the prepaid postage on the ballots, how valuable is that to you as a voter? I would like to hear it from them. I mean, personally, I think it's great. Or just like you mentioned, maintaining the same number of polling places or aggregating or consolidating some of them in specific areas. And do people look at that as a reduced opportunity to vote, or do they understand that maybe there are 1 million polling places and they're all so many in the same area that it makes sense to put them together? I mean, how do people feel about that? Because I'm sure we all have our own opinions about that too. So it'd be good to hear what the voters say on that area too.
Yeah, I agree with that, Nathan. That's a good question.
That's really helpful and interesting to think about, right? So as each year, as we think about, or each federal election or whatever the cycle is, having, if you keep working with the University of Montana, having the opportunity to have Nathan and Bradley involved and saying, like, here's what we're thinking about, inbound signature scan. Brad knows that's my favorite, right? Nobody knows what that is if they haven't been in this realm. We can figure out how to ask that question, right, in a way that voters can understand. But getting that information about what you're thinking about or what you want to know about, I think would be really awesome to inform that. Like, that's really great to think about. What do people like? You know, it's like a snap poll. Yes, no, maybe so.
Yeah, I can't completely agree with that. I think one of the more interesting little tidbits that came out of the 2020 survey was that about 26% of the voters 18 to 26 preferred to vote at a drop box location. That was a lot higher than I would have expected. And interestingly enough, that declines with age. Mm-hmm. Now, is that going to change as time goes by, right? But if we hadn't asked that question at all, or even put out that possibility, we would have no idea that a lot of young voters feel confident in that as a form of voting.
Great.
Right, I like this because that way I mean, this can be an area where the survey can help the public inform us as to how to model our behavior and how to function and better serve them. And obviously some of this stuff is only going to be possible so far as the laws shift and change with the tides, but you know, we're we're flexible here.
We can't control what they're going to do.
No.
So, Christina, I'm jumping in just a little bit, looking at the time, thinking a little bit about this and kind of the follow-up. So, forgive me, guys, I missed that EAC meeting in January, and this is the goal. This is the project I want the body as a whole to take the most focus in, and you guys are the tip of the spear. So what we're looking at is that we've kind of discussed this, we're looking at this, and we've come up with some good ideas for main areas. We don't need to have this together right now, but when we come back to the EAC meeting next week, we'll have each different subcommittee give a report back about some of the discussion. Some of this has been very broad overview. Some of it's gotten really detailed. And we can kind of take this, and my goal is to have this be the last subcommittee discussion going back in. That's a heads up for you, Shibu, there, is that when we kind of discuss this, this should be the last one, and then it should dovetail into, let's come up with some questions as the group as a whole to have a, I think, and Christina, this is where I lean on you for so much, if we had 100 questions and we narrowed it down to the 20 we want to ask, we got 100 potential questions, and I think that's good.
I'm inclined to say that having an area of interest is good, and then build a question around that addresses the question.
So I think that's exactly it. So we could come back and say, look, we came up with a few different areas that we were looking at. What's the reason for the drop off in the years? What are your barriers? What do you want to see in the future? Where these are potentials, where do you want to go? And are you getting the service you pay for? Obviously, that is very broad. But I think those are 4 great areas to start this, including that confidence matrix throughout the whole thing of, do you feel confident your ballot is counted and that all votes are cast? I tell you what, after what I have been working on for the last few weeks, I'm excited to hear where voters are at now. I'm like, I would survey them today if I could. So just some good areas to look at. And then as this, we can work with the whole committee to get some questions together and form that framework. We'll also have some other updates that I'm going to try and provide ahead of time so that everybody can review them and we can dive right into the EAC discussion. I'm always available by phone. I will answer all your calls. I'm going to send everybody the latest legislative update. I'll send you our equipment upgrade updates and then new areas about a few things. But I want this to be a discussion more on how can we take this survey, develop this, and where do we want to go? Do we want to look at asking all of the voters, and very specific list we could ask of voters who didn't vote? Do we want to ask both sets? Do we want to look at doing, not in 2022, but in 2023, a school? And that gives us a lot of good discussion. Based off of this discussion, that will fill up more than the allotted time coming up on Tuesday. And I think that these subcommittees and this plan has been a great way to break this in and eat that elephant one bite at a time.
I completely agree. And I just want to point out the obvious that even with this discussion, this is the most input that the EAC has had in this process. Like doing this to cram it all in a 1 to 2 hour meeting, this is so much more productive. And it is that way because everyone brings their thoughts and ideas to the table. And I just want to say that I really appreciate everyone like taking this treating, because this is exactly what we envisioned when we
Denver, you broke up a little bit there.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to say thank you for everyone taking this seriously and putting your thoughts and ideas into it.
Mm-hmm. Christina, you mind if
thank you, Denver, and Bradley, and Christina.
Great.
I was just going to see if Chibu or Travis, you guys have been on. I just wanted to make sure we got a chance to call you out directly, see if you had any questions, anything you wanted to add.
I don't have anything to add at this
Yeah.
time. I think that, I mean, I'm going to defer to the expert in the room here, and a lot more experience than probably all of us put together in conducting surveys. But I think that, and we talked about this before the last election, and that 2015 when we put it together, we were really wanting to collect annual data, and kind of circumstances it never really happened that way. So I'm glad that we're really getting back to that, and hopefully we can get some good data going forward.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Bradley, and everyone. I would have piped up if I had something to add, but everyone covered things that I would find interesting, and I think it's awesome to have an expert really driving the boat here. And I took some notes, and I'll look at what Nathan wrote down, and I think I'll be ready to share this stuff with the rest of the group, and I'll remember to do it at the end of the subcommittee so that we can jump into a conversation with everyone around those sort of topic areas.
Yep. And Nathan and I'll follow up with you just to make sure that we're all on the same page going through. Now, the things we missed in the last one, and to be mindful of time, I think we'll skip it in this one too, but we'll do an email follow-up to schedule the next subcommittee meeting. We normally rotate our positions. I would argue that Christina's so dang well suited for this that I would love to have her kind of help and make sure it's hard to shut me up. Sorry, everyone. But I think that if we looked at that and said, Christina, if you'd help facilitate, if we could turn around and then maybe look for somebody different to report back, that might be a great way to go.
Oh, this is my chance to vote. I second that.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, thank you. I would be honored to. And if anybody feels like they would prefer to facilitate, it won't hurt my feelings.
You did a great job. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I love talking about research. So this will become a conversation for my research methods class this summer. So I live and breathe this. It's always fun to be able to apply it, though, to a field that's much more interesting to me than just academia. So this was great. I really appreciate everybody's time and willingness to have this conversation. And I think we're headed in a really exciting direction. Being able to get input about what questions we have and what we want to address, I think is, that's the momentum behind conducting research, right? It's what do we want to ask? What do we want to ask? What's our goal? And so I appreciate everybody contributing to that conversation and enlightening, what our opportunities are here to really keep delivering high quality elections for the citizens of Missoula County.
Thank you all so much.
Very good.
Sounds good. You'll have a nice
Take care,
night.
y'all.
Thank you again.
Happy birthday, Denver.
Happy
Should we sing really quick? We got a minute left.
Happy
Ready?
birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
Good thing we're not in a
Denver.
choir.
Happy birthday to you.
Very nice.
Love it.
We were joking this morning. It's like he gave democracy a birthday present today.
It's a little bit of hyperbole, but I'll take it. No, thank you guys so much. I can't think of a better group of people to spend part of my birthday with.
Well, I hope you have a great one, Denver.
Will do. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.
Bye.